The very same people who are now feigning outrage over the arrest, detainment, and allowing to die of Alexei Navalny in a Russian prison were absolutely silent when Gonzalo Lira was arrested, detained, and allowed to die in a Ukrainian prison. Viva Frei, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida rumbler on a dreary, rainy Florida day. It's still actually beautiful, and I went biking in the rain because when it rains in Florida, it's actually still warm, so you can do it. It's beautiful, it's refreshing. Setting that aside, the news of the week, after the debacle of the Fannie Willis motion to disqualify evidentiary hearing, Alexei Navalny, a man who formed an opposition political group to Vladimir Putin in Russia, was convicted of embezzlement, jailed, apparently has died in jail, and everyone who was silent on the virtually same thing happening to the reporter Gonzalo Lira in Ukraine is up in arms, outraged, asking now for more money to fight Ukraine in their proxy war against Russia because of the death of Navalny. Now, this is one of those circumstances where I actually just don't know what to believe. I don't trust the Russian government any more than I trust the Ukrainian government. As far as I'm concerned, this is a war between two corrupt governments that shouldn't involve hundreds of billions of dollars of depletion of assets from the West to fight their proxy war against Russia. I don't know who Navalny is. I know that he was apparently convicted of embezzlement, that he founded an opposition political group to Vladimir Putin's government, that he was poisoned, that he went back to Russia, was put back in jail, and now has died. I know all of that. I don't know if Navalny is a good guy or a bad guy in the context of all of this. I know that Amnesty International said that his conviction trial was a sham of a trial. I also know that I don't trust Amnesty International as far as I can throw them. All that I know is that the people who I know are certifiable villains, that being Joe Biden and the Biden administration, are the ones crying out about Navalny while they were dead silent on Gonzalo Lira. So when the people who I know are villains in this story, they might be villains with others, but the people who I definitively know are villains, that being the Biden administration, when they come out screaming, crying outrage over this death of Alexei Navalny, and they exploit it for the purposes of demanding more money to support their proxy war against Russia via Ukraine, I've got questions, but my goodness, my biggest question is, who the hell is letting Joe Biden do these press conferences?
Good afternoon. I'm heading off to East Palestine in a moment, but I wanted to say a few things this morning about Alexei Navalny.
Joe Biden came out and did a 10-minute press conference to lament the death of Navalny, to use it as a catalyst to demand more money for Ukraine to support the so-called bipartisan bill coming out of the Senate. He looks like a demented old man, and my God, it's nothing but confession through projection with everything that he says in the context of this presser. And my goodness, if people were inclined to be conspiratorial and suspect whether or not America might have had a hand in the death of Navalny, the opportunistic way the Biden administration is trying to capitalize off this death, well, my goodness, that can certainly add a little more credence to that conspiracy type theory. But set that aside, let me just pull some highlights from this debacle of a press conference.
You know, like millions of people around the world, I'm literally both not surprised and outraged by the news. Reported death of Alexei Navalny. He bravely stood up to the corruption, the violence, and all the bad things that the Putin government was doing.
The violence, the corruption, all the bad things that Putin is... Demented Joe Biden cannot string together a sentence. I'm actually inclined to believe the administrative state is actually allowing Joe Biden to do presser after presser, debacle presser after debacle presser, so that they can actually 25th him when the time comes.
In response, Putin had him poisoned. He had him arrested. He had him prosecuted for fabricated crimes. He sentenced him to prison. He was held in isolation.
Arrested, prosecuted for fabricated crimes, in case you didn't understand what demented Joe just said there. Arrested, prosecuted for fabricated crimes, and imprisoned. My goodness, what did Joe Biden and Garland do with the January 6ers? What is Joe Biden's DOJ doing right now with Donald Trump? What they accuse Putin of having done is exactly what they are in the process of doing themselves. It was a Joseph Goebbels propaganda tactic. Accuse your enemies of what you are doing so as to create confusion. It also seems to be the defining feature of the liberal mind. Confession through projection.
Reports of his death, if they're true, and I have no reason to believe they're not, Russian authorities are going to tell their own story. But make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible. What has happened to Navalny is yet more proof of Putin's brutality.
Make no mistake, make no mistake. I've got a theory in life, and it's proven to be quite accurate, that more often than not, when anyone starts a sentence with make no mistake, what they're about to say is going to be an utter lie. And by the way, Biden, if it's Putin's fault that Navalny died in prison, it is also Zelensky's fault that Gonzalo Lira died in prison. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If it's a tragedy and an act of totalitarian violence when Putin does it, so too is it when Zelensky does it. Unless it's just another case of rules for thee but not for me. When Putin does it, it's an act of barbarism, it's an act of war, it's an act of totalitarian oppression. When Zelensky does it, it's justified.
This tragedy reminds us of the stakes of this moment. We have to provide the funding so Ukraine can keep defending itself against Putin's vicious onslaughts and war crimes. You know, there was a bipartisan Senate vote that passed overwhelmingly in the United States Senate to fund Ukraine. Now, as I've said before, and I mean this in a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching the House of Representatives. The failure to support Ukraine at this critical moment will never be forgotten. It's going to go down in the pages of history. It really is. It's consequential. And the clock is ticking. And this has to happen. We have to help now.
Never let a good tragedy go to waste. My goodness, is it convenient that Navalny died right at the time there was a big debate over the border bill. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant the foreign aid bill. That was once upon a time the border bill. Another $60 billion in aid to Ukraine, in addition to the $200 billion already provided in aid to Ukraine. And I don't know how much of that reaches the end line. But my goodness, is it a convenient thing? Convenient timing, Navalny's death. Now let's go exploit it for political profit.
All of us should reject the dangerous statements made by the previous president that invited Russia to invade our NATO allies if they weren't paying up.
The previous president, he's got a name, and he's probably going to be the future president, President Donald Trump. And by the way, Joe, not that you know any different, you're a bloody liar. That's not what he said, but just add it to the list of lies and hoaxes that you're guilty of perpetrating.
NATO was busted until I came along. I said, everybody's going to pay. They said, well, if we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not. They couldn't believe the answer. They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Oh, and by the way, not for nothing, if there's anyone who's responsible for encouraging Russia's incursion into Ukraine, surprise, surprise, it's you.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia.
You said that Russia would be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. Are you saying that a minor incursion by Russia into Ukrainian territory would not lead to the sanctions that you have threatened, or are you effectively giving Putin permission to make a small incursion into the country?
Good question. That's how it did sound like, didn't it? That's how it did sound like, didn't it? That's how it did sound like, didn't it?
He said if an ally did not pay their dues, he'd encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want. I guess I should clear my mind here a little bit and not say what I'm really thinking. But let me be clear. This is an outrageous thing for a president to say. I can't fathom. From Truman on, they're rolling over in their graves hearing this. As long as I'm president, America stands by our sacred commitment to our NATO allies, as they have stood by their commitments to us repeatedly. Putin and the whole world should know, if any adversary were to attack us, our NATO allies would back us. And if Putin were to attack a NATO ally, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory.
Unless, of course, it's just a minor incursion.
That's how it did sound like, didn't it?
All right, so that's about as much value as I can add to this story. Robert Burns and I will be talking about it tonight during our Sunday night live stream, and I am curious to know what he thinks about it. And if you like my content, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below. Viva Frei on Rumble. The Viva Frei on Twitter. VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com on Locals. But more important than anything, get out there, even if it's raining, eat healthy, exercise, talk to people in real life, and now you know you vlog. Peace out, peace.